Hey guys, Yips here, coming at you with another video. Today I want to take some time to talk about Affliction Warlock in Mythic Plus. Warlock is currently a great spec in Keystones, and I know a lot of people have been looking for various information on how the spec works in Mythic Plus, so hopefully this video will be able to give you all that you need. We'll start with talents, soulbinds, and gearing options that you have as a Warlock for Mythic Plus. Afterwards, we'll go into the more juicy stuff, talking about rotational things, the different type of openers you have on various packs in Mythic Plus, how to do burst windows, how to set up your ramps, how to use your cooldowns, all of the good stuff so you can become a better Warlock when you go into Keystones. So first and foremost, let's take a little look at the talents that are available. So this is pretty much the standard build that you're going to be wanting to run as a Warlock in Mythic Plus. The one thing that you can change is you could run Mortal Coil over Hallowed Terror. It's going to be a personal preference. However, Drain Soul, Writhe and Agony, Sow the Seeds, Haunt, and Dark Soul Misery are staple talents. You really don't want to be changing these around. Running things like Siphon Life or Phantom Singularity to get more single target is just not going to help the Keystone. You're going to make it much faster just by adding that extra AoE DPS on 2, 3, 4, however many targets. It's just not going to be worth it to increase your single target by a small amount, but losing a lot of AoE DPS. Drain Soul in the first row, generating soul shards is so key to Warlock in all Mythic Plus content, prepping for the next pack by sniping once the pack that you kill gets low, sniping mid-pack in order to have a good shard sustain, getting extra soul shards to spend on Seed of Corruption, Malefic Wrath, whatever it might be, are just 100% necessary in dungeons. Drain Soul, super good talent. Haunt, Grimoire Sacrifice, and Shadowy Brace just aren't that great. Haunt is an okay priority damage target. It just makes you do 10% more damage on single target. Pretty solid choice. And then finally, Dark Soul Misery. Lining this up with your Solar Rot, lining it up with Dark Soul. Super nice talent, works well with on-use trinkets as well. So these are the talents, pretty straightforward. This is the build you want to run. In terms of Soulbind, we're going to be playing Dreamweaver. All of our burst damage comes during that nice Soul Rot window, so since we're doing all of our damage during Soul Rot, having this little haste puddle with our Decaying Soul Satchel, which we'll talk a little bit about later, is going to give us a lot of burst DPS. The damage conduits that we'll be using are Withering Bolt, Soul Eater, and Rolling Agony. You could swap Focus Malignancy in for Rolling Agony if the mobs are dying extremely quick and they're not even living the duration of one Agony. However, this really never happens, and Mythic Plus, you're pretty much always going to be better off running Rolling Agony. It allows you to get more Drain Soul uptime on single targets, so it's not even that much of a single target loss, and the ease of play and the amount that it allows you to do compared to playing a talent like Focus Malignancy is just by far and away worth it. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. So this is the Soulbind you're going to want to play, and these are the conduits that you're going to want to run. Okay, so right before we get into the damage rotation stuff, let's talk quickly about gearing. You're going to want one on use and one passive trinket. The passive trinkets options that are good are the Forbidden Necromantic Tome, the Titanic Ocular Gland, or the Unbound Changeling. And in terms of on-use trinkets, the best one is the Shadowed Orb of Torment. Other viable options are going to be IQD and Soul Letting Ruby. Soul Letting Ruby is probably a little bit better than IQD, but really what you're going to want to go for is the Shadowed Orb of Torment. Reason being is you can precast it before you get into combat with a pack, giving it increased value for that sense, but also it covers your cooldowns, it gives you Mastery, which is one of your best Mythic Plus stats, and Ruby gains a lot of value when mobs get low. Specifically in Raid or in Sims, as mobs get lower on HP, you get more crit. In Mythic Plus, often you're using your cooldowns at the start of the pull when the mobs have high HP. This devalues the Ruby, but Orb doesn't care about mob HP. It just has a channel time. It also does damage to you, which is the factor that you do want to consider sometimes. However, in Mythic Plus, it's usually not that big of a deal, and it's just an excellent stat trinket. So good. So good. This is by far the best trinket. In terms of legendaries, you're going to want to be using the Decaying Soul Satchel. Doesn't matter if you craft it on hands or boots, just whichever piece you have better in terms of regular epic gear, just craft it on the other one. So if you have good hands but bad boots, craft it on boots. If you have good boots and bad hands, craft it on hands. If you have good of both, doesn't really matter. Haste and Mastery are by far and away the best stats that you want in keys. Haste is extremely good because when packs die quickly, haste stat becomes extremely valuable. Mastery is good, it just buffs the flat damage that you do. really haste mastery is what you want to go for, and that's what I'm focusing on my gear. Even in Mythic Plus, on AoE, it's better for me to run this 252 neck with haste and mastery than it is for me to run this 259 one with haste and crit. Mastery and haste are excellent stats for keystones. Okay, so that's all the initial stuff just to get it out of the way quickly for those of you who aren't too familiar with Warlock. Hopefully that helps you in terms of what talents you want to run and what sort of gearing options that you should be looking at, as well as the soulbind. But let's jump into the juicy stuff on how you actually want to be dealing damage as a Warlock in Mythic Plus. So what does Warlock's damage breakdown look like, and how do we want to min-max this? So here we have a 22 Halls of Atonement that I ran. I wasn't getting PI'd or anything in this dungeon, so this is a pretty realistic overall that you could see for a Warlock doing in a group that is pulling fairly aggressively. If the group is more of a pug style in a 20, you'll probably be looking at more of the 13 to 14k range, but if your group is doing good size pulls, you can do upwards of 16 to 17,000 DPS as AF. So the damage breakdown looks like this, and you can see that there's one thing that really stands out, and that is Seed of Corruption. Seed just does a ridiculous amount of DPS in Keystone, specifically like Halls of Atonement, but either in other ones, if we take a look at a 23 Spires, it's still an extremely high portion of my DPS. So, since Seed is so good, we want to be maximizing our shards with Seed of Corruption throughout the Keystones. And there are different ways that we can do that on the packs that are involved in the key. So let's talk a little bit about the type of openers that we can use to get the most out of our shards on our Seed of Corruptions. So the first one we'll go over is the standard opener, just sort of what you'll see every sort of regular Joe do when they go into a pack without thinking too much. And this is how most normal packs will go. So you'll go into a pack, you'll have your Soul Rot off cooldown, and you'll precast an Unstable Affliction, maybe into a Haunt if the mobs are getting grouped up quickly. You'll do Agony, 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 Agony. You'll do Soul Rot, and then you'll start spamming Seed of Corruption. And this is a pretty standard opener that you'll see quite frequently in Mythic Plus as the mobs are getting grouped up. If the mobs are already grouped, sometimes you'll cast a Seed beforehand, so I'll show you a little bit what that looks like. So if the mobs are already pre-stacked, what you can sometimes do is precast a Seed of Corruption, and then get your Agonies out like this. And what this does is just applies your corruptions before you start actually doing damage. You'll cast your UA, you'll cast your Haunt, you'll cast your Soul Rot, and then you would go into Seed spamming again. And all you want to do in terms of maintenance is make sure you're keeping up your Agonies, making sure you keep your Unstable Affliction on targets that are going to die, so it gives you that Soul Shard refund, and just looking to sustain Soul Shards as best you can on the pull. If mobs start looking like they're going to be dying, you can switch your Unstable Affliction to them, you can drain them for additional shard gen, so you can sustain your shards on those pulls and get more Seed of Corruption damage overall. So that's going to be a pretty standard opener, so we'll go over that one more time really quick, and we'll move on to a burst opener afterwards. So standard opener again, oftentimes the pack will be grouped, so you'll precast a Seed, you will spread out your Agonies, cast UA into Haunt, then you'll do Soul Rot into your Seed of Corruption spamming. Pretty standard opener here. This is what you will do in a lot of pulls in many dungeons. So for example, a pull where this pretty much always happens is, think the second pull of a dungeon. So if we go into halls and we look at the second pull, this is a pretty typical first one. If we go to the second one, this is what most groups will do. This is the type of pull where you would do that sort of thing. You would maybe precast a Seed, you would cast a bunch of Agonies, get your UA rolling on one target, maybe not cast a Haunt because it's not too important of a GCD, go into your Soul Rot, and then go into just spamming Seed, swapping your UA around as you deem necessary to generate more Soul Shards, and just killing the pull. Very standard. Very, very standard. And this is the type of thing that you would also do on the pull after, where you would be fighting the Shard. You would be getting your UA, getting your Haunt on that prio target, spreading out your Agonies, hitting your Soul Rot, and then spamming your Seed of Corruption. And so that's the standard opener. Now, what are some situations where you don't want to do a standard opener like that? And there are a few, so we're going to talk about them. One of them is going to be the burst opener. So what does the burst opener do, and what is its purpose? So the burst opener is a thing that you kind of want to prep for. You don't want to go into a burst opener with low soul shards. You need to have at least 4 or 5. So typically what's going to happen is you're going to prep the previous pull and make sure you have those 4 or 5 soul shards. Then once you enter combat, and you get into that pull, what you can end up doing is just casting Soul Rot and going into Seed Spam. Without any agonies, no Unstable Affliction, no Haunt, no nothing. You just spam, spam, spam Seed of Corruption. That's it. That's all you do. Soul Rot into Seed Spam. You can usually get, well, you can get 5 off, I guess, in a row if you have 5 shards. If you cast 1 agony, you might be able to get 6 or 7 off in a row. And the idea is, by the time that you're out of shards, the pack is going to be dead. So this pack is only going to live 10, maybe 11 seconds, and then it's going to be completely dead. And situations where this may happen and may occur are in dungeons like a lower or a tyrannical Spires of Ascension. If you're in a really coordinated, strong group, and you're going to this side over here, and you're doing the Forsworn Goliath pull with all of the Ether Divers, and that pack is going to get just blown up with everyone's cooldowns in the Spear, sometimes you don't need to do that full ramp. You can maybe cast 1 Agony, go into Soul Rot, start casting Unstable, or start casting your Seed of Corruptions, and I've bursted well over 100,000 DPS on a pull like this, just doing that sort of opener, and by the time I'm out of shards, all of the mobs are dead. Another example of where this might be used is in Sanguine Depths, when you're in the hallway and you have like a 10-sec of the buff, you're doing 50% more damage, the trash is coming in, it has low HP, sometimes it's not worth dotting it, you just want to press Soul Rot and go straight into your Seed of Corruption spam in order to get as much damage out quickly. The idea here is the mobs are only going to live a few seconds and you're just trying to maximize that seed damage throughout. Again, very important that you go into those burst openers with a lot of shards preemptively prepped, okay? You want to be having 4 or 5 soul shards ready for that particular moment. Because if you don't have shards, you're not generating any, you're not going to be able to get a lot of Seed of Corruptions off. So really quick, again, just what that would look like. Let's wait for these agonies to fall, and I can show you what that type of burst damage would look like. So let's say we want to do a quick burst setup on these training dummies. We can just go into Soul Rot, and then start spamming our seed. And you can see here, it's a very quick way to do a lot of damage. I run out of shards, but in 10 seconds I was able to do a ton of DPS on just 4 targets. This does not happen frequently, so I wouldn't really recommend doing this sort of an opener very often. But in situations where you can make this work, it can be extremely effective, and it's just something that you want to have in your toolkit. The next type of opener and the next type of way you can set up in a Mythic Plus dungeon is a way where you don't extend your Soul Rot, you're just trying to maximize your DPS on an absolutely massive Giga pull. So sometimes this can happen, say for the first pull in Sanguine Depths, you could be doing it on, if you're pulling all of these mobs together, that's pretty large, it could warrant this type of gameplay. Halls of Atonement, if you're doing a sort of route where you're doing, say, this sort of a pull in the opener where you have all of these mobs being grouped up together, something like this that's very large. I've done this sort of a pull before. This is where you want to utilize this sort of an opener, where it's an absolute just ridiculous amount of mobs. It doesn't happen that often, but when it does, you want to be ready for it. The way that you want to be playing is you want to be playing around your dark, decaying soul satchel, okay? And the way that you do that is you want to get as many Seed of Corruption GCDs off as possible during your Soul Rot. You're saying, I don't care about extending my Soul Rot. I don't care about extending my UA. All I care about is getting as many Seed of Corruptions possible off. That's all I care about. So the way that this sort of an opener would look is you'd be running in with the tank, you'd be pulling the mobs, and all you're doing is you're prepping the pull with agonies. And then once the pull is stopped and grouped, you'll extend the agonies with Dark Glare. You won't use any anything like UA, you won't use anything like Haunt, you might UA the main target, and then once you've extended your unstable or your agonies, you'll go straight into your Soul Rot into spamming your Seed of Corruption. And what this allows is it lets you get more GCDs off during your haste puddle and during your decaying soul satchel. Whereas if you were to press your Dark Glare after your Soul Rot, you would lose a GCD in that window. And this is very minor min-maxing, and yes, you lose the damage of the Soul Rot, but sometimes on very big pulls, playing like this can actually be very good. Another situation where this comes up where playing like this is quite strong is if you would ever have to be moving. Well, this is very niche. If you were to press your Soul Rot and then you have to move and use your Dark Glare, whereas if you could have used your Dark Glare to move and then you hit your Soul Rot, it's very niche. It doesn't really happen very often, but just things that you want to be thinking about in a dungeon. But again, on big AoE pulls, playing like this sort of a play style can be very worth it. Okay, so these are the three really main sort of types of ways you can do damage. The standard, the burst, and this one I like to kind of call the prolonged sort of opener where you're just really getting a bunch of agonies out and then going straight into seed spamming afterwards. So standard, burst, and then prolonged. Now, in terms of how you want to be using your Dark Soul, your Unused Trinket, your Dark Glare, and your Soul Rot, you want to be syncing your cooldowns together. So you want to be using your 2 minutes together. You want to be using your Orb. You want to be using your Dark Soul. You want to be using your Dark Glare. You want to be using your Soul Rot all in unison to get as much burst damage out as possible. So a typical Mythic Plus standard opener pull often will look like this. You'll pre-orb and you'll get into combat, and what you'll do is you'll precast a seed, and then you'll try to ramp quickly by pressing your Dark Soul Misery early before you get anything done. And then once you have all your UAs out and you're doing your standard opener, you press your Soul Rot, you extend it. This is just a standard opener, but with Dark Soul. And that early Dark Soul allows you to get your dots out faster and basically get to the point where you're doing your damage faster. So if you just want to look at what that looks like visually, is if we can take a quick look here. If you press your Dark Soul early, what it basically allows you to do is very quickly in the pull, if down here is time, you're able to reach that maximum DPS here a lot faster than if you were to, say, do a extended ramp without Dark Soul, and then you might do a little bit more damage, but it would happen later. So the idea is you want to be getting your damage out faster because the mobs just won't live that long, and a lot of the time Dark Souling early like this is just better, even if you do lose a little bit of objective DPS here. If the mobs end up dying at this point here, you've lost a lot of damage. So the idea is you're just getting that damage ramp out a little bit sooner compared to later. Now, how do you want to judge this? How do you want to know when you want to be using that Dark Soul early or you want to be using that Dark Soul later? Well, if the mobs are dead before your Soul Rot window has fallen off and before you've run out of shards, you probably didn't use it early enough and you want to be using it sooner. But if the mobs are still alive when your Dark Soul is fading and when your Soul Rot is faded, then you probably could have used it later in the pull and done a longer ramp. So what that would look like is you would do the same sort of standard opener thing where you get your pre-seed out, you spread your agonies, you cast your UA, you cast your Unstable Affliction. I'm just going to wait here a second for my Dark Soul to be up. And you can actually press your Dark Soul now in order to get the maximum value out of it, and then you would, extend with Dark Glare and you'd have your Orb running and things like that. But that's sort of when you would be using your Dark Soul, is later into the pull after you've gotten that standard ramp out already, so you have all of your agonies, you have all your charge, and you have your UA out, you have your haunt out, and then you would Dark Soul into Soul Rot so that Dark Soul is lasting longer during the period where you're doing more DPS. Now, I would say that over 50% of the pulls, I am pressing my Dark Soul before the mobs are completely grouped and I'm doing damage. So I would say over 50% of the time, I'm doing that thing where I press my Dark Soul early. So if we take a quick look like a dungeon like Spires, almost every single pull, almost every single one, where I'm using my Dark Soul and other people are using cooldowns, I'm going to be using it early. So on the first pull, where people typically Bloodlust on Fortified, where you're pulling these 7 mobs here together like this, you're usually going to want a Dark Soul early as the mobs are being grouped. You would go ahead and hit your Dark Soul now, and then you would do your Agony, 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 Haunt, UA, Soul Rot into Dark Glare, and you would make sure you have your Unused Trinket rolling during that. Typically, you don't want to be delaying your Dark Soul in that. Now, if you're on a really high key and that pack is going to be living a really long time, then sure, maybe you could make an argument that, yeah, Dark Souling later is going to be better for you. But in a lot of situations, it's just simply not the case. You're going to want to hit it early. It's going to end up working out better for you. Now, what happens when you don't have Dark Soul and you don't have your Summon Dark Glare out? What do you want to do with your Soul Rot? Because your Soul Rot has a 1-minute cooldown, and if you want to sync them, you're going to want it up every single time that your Dark Soul and your Dark Glare are up. This pretty much means that you almost want to be using it on cooldown. you really don't have that much wiggle room. Because if you delay your Soul Rot, say 30 seconds, that's 30 seconds where your Dark Soul and your Dark Glare are off cooldown, but you don't have your Soul Rot available for them. So you really want to be looking for times when you're in combat to be using that Soul Rot as soon as it's available. Typically in dungeons it goes Dark Soul Soul Rot pull, mobs die, next pull. Soul Rot pull, mobs die, next pull. Dark Soul Soul Rot pull, next pull. Each pull typically you get one use of either your 1 minutes or one use of your 2 minutes, and generally that's how they line up. But if you don't end up using your Soul Rot between them, you actually end up oftentimes missing a use. So if you were to delay your Soul Rot too long, you might be like, oh, but my cooldowns are up soon and I want to use them. I'm just not going to use my Soul Rot. Whereas if you pressed it on that 1 minute, you would have gotten an extra free use out of it. So just make sure you're using your Soul Rot pretty much on cooldown outside of your Summon Dark Lair and your Dark Soul window. You can get better at this over time in terms of knowing how your cooldowns line up, but you really want to make sure that it is available for every time your 2 minutes come up. So that's enough rambling about damage sort of stuff, how it all works on AoE. Let's go into an actual dungeon here. I have a VOD and kind of show you how these things work in a keystone. So here is a Halls of Atonement. This is a pug in a 22. So what you're going to be seeing here is that sort of opener where I don't really UA or haunt. I just kind of extend my agonies as the pack is grouped, and then I go right into that Soul Rot burst. So the dungeon's starting. I know the tank is going to probably do a big pull as most do during the start, and what I'll do here is I'll go ahead and I'll get ahead of the tank, cast 2, I'll blink forward with my soul shape just to get into a better position, channel, and then here, you see the mobs are getting grouped. I've already pressed my Dark Soul. I've already used my on-use trinket. Everything is rolling because I want to get my ramp out quickly. This pack is going to die very fast. I'm getting my agonies out, getting everything rolling. Dark Glare, UA, Soul Rot, and then as soon as I press my Soul Rot, all I'm hitting is my seeds. I have my Soul Rot buff up, I have my Field of Blossoms, I have my Dark Soul, I have my Trinket, I have my Blood Fury. This is where I'm doing DPS. And the mobs are grouped, and you can just see me shoot up on the meters here. And this is typically how a fast pull like this will work in the dungeon. I don't really care too much about my DPS that I'm doing with my Soul Rot, with my UA. I'm really just focusing on that Seed of Corruption DPS. Now, when packs die, and when mobs are dying, you want to make sure that you're prepping for the next pull. And what this typically looks like is when all of the mobs are faded, you typically want to be at 4 or 5 soul shards so that when you get into the next pull, you have sort of that bank of damage saved up that you can use on all of those new mobs. So you'll see here we get in combat, and I'm just doing that standard sort of opener. I got my UA out, I'm getting my agonies out, my soul rot's coming up in 10 seconds. I'm going to press that when it's up, I'll have all my dots out, and it will be just that standard opener. So pretty standard pull here, maintaining my agonies. And the main thing that I'm thinking about on this sort of a pull, because all I really need to do is maintain my agonies and keep up my damage with my soul rot and my seed spamming, is maintaining a high level of shards throughout the pull. And the way that you see me doing that is by using my unstable affliction on mobs that are low and then instantly going back into seed spamming. And when I find time to drain, I go ahead and do that on the mobs that are low. Now, the way that UA functions in terms of the shard gen is kind of nice because when mobs get low, you don't need to continue to focus on them in order to get the shard gen when they die. You don't need to kind of sit there and wait and maybe waste a global spamming Drain Soul. When they die, you get the shard back. It's a 1 GCD investment, where Drain Soul might be a 1 or 2 GCD investment to get that shard. UA is just a lot more efficient than Drain Soul is in terms of getting shard gen back on a lot of these packs. So very, very frequently you'll see me kind of switching my UA target around in order to generate shards. Same sort of idea here. You'll see the pack is dead. I'm back up to that 5 soul shard mark. I've prepped for the next pull, and this is going to be again one of those standard openers where I use my on-use trinket, I use my dark soul, I get my agonies out, I get my haunt out, I get my soul rot out, I dark layer, and then I spam my seeds. So you see here, tank is going in, I precast my trinket, I press my Dark Soul because I know this pack is going to die extremely quickly. UA, Haunt, Soul Rot, Dark Lair, spamming Seed of Corruption. Standard stuff. Very, very standard sort of opener here. And lots of damage on 4 targets. And again, you want to be focusing that UA and that haunt on that prio target, which is going to be that shard. And as you see mobs starting to get lower and starting to die, you'll see me start to sort of switch my UA target around in order to generate soul shards that I can then use on more Seed of Corruptions, more Malefic Grafts as the mob gets low, and continues throughout the whole dungeon. So this is how you'll be playing Warlock once you get more fluid with it in Keystones of higher level, whatever you may be doing. You'll get more familiar with what type of burst window or what type of opener you're going to be wanting to focus on as you move forward through various Keystones. And on this next pull, same sort of thing, just a very standard opener where I just get my UAs out, get my agonies out, cast my soul rot once I have everything rolling, going into the seed spam, just a standard opener. UA, agonies, soul rot, damage. So hopefully this was a little bit insightful for you guys on how to play Warlock in Mythic Plus. I highly recommend, the biggest thing that's going to come with this is experience. So once you know the type of damage openers that you can do as a Warlock, it's going to come down to experience to learn which one you should be doing for which type of pulls. Now, a lot of this will come down to what sort of group composition are you running? Are you playing with a Windwalker Monk and a Fire Mage? Are there combustion and 2 minutes when cooldowns up? If so, you're probably going to want to go for a faster opener. If not, maybe you're going to want to go for a more extended one because the pack is going to live longer. What type of pack are you fighting? Is it one with a lot of HP? Is it one with not a lot of HP? Is it tyrannical? Is it not tyrannical? You'll learn as you go through, but as long as you know the type of damage profiles that you have to work with, you can kind of eventually sort of get a vision on each pack of which one you want to be using. So thanks for watching. Hopefully this was insightful for you guys in Mythic Plus, and I will see you guys later. One little tip for those of you who stuck around the whole video that I'll be giving you guys is in some dungeons it can be worth it to switch to Siphon Life and Phantom Singularity at specific moments in the Keystone. If you have the dungeon portals, and say you go and do a Mists of Tyrannus Scythe on Tyrannical difficulty, you can start the Keystone out with these talents. Then you can use your dungeon portal outside, switch to AoE talents for the rest of the dungeon after the first boss, and it can be more effective if that wall is the first boss. And you can use this in a few different dungeons. Say at the end of Spires, when it's really just 1 to 2 targets between the third boss and the fourth boss, you can do the same sort of idea. Whether or not it's worth your time to do that, you can make the personal decision, but it's just sort of a little niche thing that Warlock has available to it. So either way, thanks for chilling, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace!